Some questions have sat unanswered for so long that entire careers have been built and ended trying to solve them. Tonight we're covering 20 genuine mysteries from the ancient world, verified by historians and scientists, that remain unresolved even with satellites, laser scanners, and some of the most advanced laboratory equipment ever built. No aliens, no fake history, just real objects, real ruins, and real questions nobody has fully answered yet. 20 ancient mysteries. Science still can't explain, starting now. The Antikythera mechanism, a computer built before its time. In the year 1901, a group of Greek sponge divers, sheltering from a storm near the small island of Antikythera, stumbled upon the wreck of an ancient Roman-era cargo ship resting on the seafloor. Among the recovered treasures, statues, jewellery, and coins was a corroded, unremarkable-looking lump of bronze that sat largely ignored in an Athens museum for years before anyone realised what they were actually looking at. The initial recovery operation itself, conducted using primitive early diving equipment at depths considered genuinely dangerous by the standards of the era, cost at least one diver his life and left several others with serious decompression injuries. A genuine human cost behind a discovery that wouldn't even be properly understood or appreciated for several more decades, since the corroded bronze fragments initially attracted far less immediate attention from museum staff than the more visually impressive statues and jewellery recovered from the same wreck. The shipwreck itself, dated to sometime around 70 to 60 BCE, based on associated pottery and coins recovered alongside the mechanism, appears to have been a Roman cargo vessel transporting a considerable quantity of Greek luxury goods, statues, and artwork, likely as plunder or purchased treasure being shipped toward Rome, when it apparently sank during a storm off the rocky coast of Antikythera. The wreck itself remains an active site of ongoing archaeological investigation even today, with modern diving expeditions continuing to recover additional artifacts from the site well over a century after its initial discovery, including, in more recent excavation seasons, additional bronze and marble statue fragments that suggest the original cargo included even more valuable and historically significant material than initially recovered by the original 1901 sponge diving expedition. That lump of bronze turned out to be one of the most sophisticated mechanical devices ever recovered from the ancient world, a device now known as the Antikythera mechanism. X-ray imaging and detailed CT scanning conducted decades later revealed an astonishingly complex system of interlocking bronze gears, more than 30 of them, housed inside a wooden case roughly the size of a large book, with inscriptions covering nearly every surface describing astronomical and calendrical functions. Modern researchers have used advanced X-ray tomography, a technique similar to a medical CT scan, but calibrated specifically for examining ancient corroded metal artifacts, to peer through the mechanism's heavily corroded bronze fragments without needing to physically disassemble or damage the extremely fragile remaining pieces, revealing gear teeth, axles, and pointer mechanisms hidden beneath centuries of accumulated marine corrosion. This non-invasive imaging technology has allowed researchers to reconstruct, with genuine confidence, the mechanism's internal gear train, confirming that the device employed differential gearing, a mechanical principle allowing the combination of two separate rotational inputs into a single combined output, a genuinely sophisticated engineering concept that wouldn't reappear in documented Western mechanical technology again for well over 1,000 years following the mechanism's original construction. Once researchers finally understood what they were dealing with, the implications were genuinely staggering. This device, built sometime between 150 and 100 BCE, could track the position of the sun and moon, predict lunar and solar eclipses years in advance, model the irregular orbit of the moon using a clever gear arrangement that anticipated a mathematical concept not formally described in Europe until the work of the astronomer Hipparchus, and even display the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games and other Pan-Hellenic athletic competitions. The mechanism's gear-based technology, once properly reconstructed, has genuinely stunned historians of science and engineering, since nothing else approaching this level of mechanical sophistication appears anywhere else in the surviving historical or archaeological record for well over 1,000 years afterward. The next known devices employing anything close to comparable gearing complexity don't appear until European astronomical clocks built in the 14th century, creating a genuinely uncomfortable 1400-year gap in the historical record of mechanical engineering that nobody has ever adequately explained. What makes this mystery so persistent isn't simply that the device is impressive, it's that we don't actually know who built it, and we have no other surviving example of anything comparable from the ancient world at all. Various inscriptions and stylistic details have led some researchers to connect the mechanism to the island of Rhodes, a significant centre of astronomical study in antiquity, and some have speculated about a connection to the ancient astronomer Hipparchus himself, or possibly to a workshop associated with the polymath Archimedes, given the sophistication of the mechanical philosophy involved. But no definitive attribution has ever been established, and no comparable device, no half-finished prototype, no earlier or later example of similar complexity has ever turned up anywhere else, despite well over a century of dedicated searching by archaeologists and historians of ancient technology. The connection to Rhodes stems partly from ancient Roman writers, including Cicero, who personally visited the island and left behind written descriptions of remarkable mechanical devices built there capable of modelling the movements of the sun, moon, and planets, texts that predate the mechanism's actual rediscovery by many centuries, but that align suggestively with the kind of technology the Antikythera mechanism itself represents, offering tantalizing textual evidence of a broader mechanical tradition that existed in the ancient world, even though no other physical example of that tradition has ever been recovered by archaeologists to independently confirm these ancient literary descriptions. This absence is what genuinely troubles historians studying the device today. Complex technology doesn't typically appear in isolation. It usually develops incrementally, with earlier, simpler prototypes and later refinements documented somewhere in the historical or archaeological record. The Antikythera mechanism appears to have arrived, as far as our current evidence shows, essentially fully formed, without any of the expected supporting evidence of a broader mechanical tradition that must have existed to produce something this sophisticated in the first place. Recent research, including advanced imaging techniques that have revealed previously unreadable inscriptions covering the device's surfaces, continues to add new detail to our understanding of exactly what the mechanism could do. But the fundamental question, who built this remarkable object and why does nothing else quite like it survive from the ancient world, remains genuinely unresolved. And if a single object can preserve this much unexplained sophistication, an entire ancient manuscript, still sitting today in a Yale University library, has resisted every single attempt at decipherment for well over a century. The Voynich manuscript, the book no one can read. Named after the Polish-American book dealer who acquired it in 1912, the Voynich manuscript is a roughly 240-page illustrated book written entirely in an unknown script, using an unknown language, or possibly an elaborate and deliberately constructed cipher that has resisted every serious attempt at decipherment by professional cryptographers, linguists, and codebreakers for well over a century. Radiocarbon dating conducted on the manuscript's vellum pages in 2009 placed its creation sometime in the early 1400s, during the early Renaissance period in Europe, ruling out earlier theories that the document might be a later forgery created to deceive collectors. The manuscript is genuinely beautiful to look at, filled with detailed illustrations of plants that don't correspond to any known species, elaborate astronomical and astrological diagrams featuring unfamiliar symbols and zodiac imagery, and a series of pages depicting small, nude female figures bathing in elaborate networks of green-tinted pools and tubes, connected by an intricate system of pipes that some researchers have connected to early alchemical or medical diagrams, though the precise meaning remains entirely unclear. The manuscript's roughly 240 pages are conventionally divided by researchers into several distinct thematic sections based purely on their illustration style, since the actual meaning of any accompanying text remains entirely unknown. A herbal section depicting unidentifiable plants alongside blocks of text, an astronomical section featuring circular diagrams resembling star charts and zodiac symbols, a biological section containing the unusual bathing figures already mentioned, a cosmological section with additional large fold-out circular diagrams, a pharmaceutical section depicting labelled jars alongside plant parts, and a final section consisting of continuous blocks of text without any accompanying illustration at all, sometimes referred to by researchers simply as the recipes section, based on its visual resemblance to similar recipe or instruction style formatting found in other genuine medieval manuscripts. The manuscript script itself, sometimes called Voynich by researchers who study it, consists of a consistent, repeated alphabet of unfamiliar characters that follows genuine statistical patterns consistent with an actual language rather than appearing to be simple random gibberish. Word frequency, letter distribution, and other linguistic patterns within the text closely resemble patterns found in genuine natural languages, which is precisely what makes the manuscript so tantalizing and so frustrating in equal measure. If it were pure nonsense, deliberately created to deceive without any real underlying meaning, we would expect to see considerably more randomness in its statistical structure than researchers have actually found. Specific statistical measures researchers have applied to the text, including something called Zipf's law, which describes a consistent, predictable relationship between word frequency and word rank found across virtually every genuine natural human language ever studied, show the Voynich manuscript's text conforming remarkably closely to this same natural language pattern, a finding that has been independently replicated by multiple separate research teams using different analytical methods, and one that continues to represent one of the strongest pieces of evidence suggesting the manuscript encodes some form of genuine, meaningful linguistic content, rather than representing purely random or meaningless marks arranged simply to superficially resemble writing. Over the past century, the list of people who have attempted to crack the Voynich manuscript's code reads like a who's who of cryptographic history, including codebreakers who worked on breaking Axis communications during the Second World War, professional linguists specializing in medieval European languages, and, in more recent years, computer scientists applying sophisticated machine learning algorithms specifically designed to detect patterns in encrypted or unfamiliar text. Every single one of these attempts has ultimately failed to produce a decipherment that other experts in the field accept as genuine and consistently verifiable across the entire manuscript. William Friedman, one of the most accomplished American cryptographers of the 20th century, whose career included breaking several major Japanese diplomatic and military codes during the Second World War, spent considerable time studying the Voynich manuscript across several decades of his career, eventually concluding that the text most likely represented an attempt at a constructed, artificial language rather than a natural human language transcribed using an unfamiliar alphabet or a straightforward substitution cipher. Despite his genuine expertise and sustained effort, Friedman was never able to produce a verified decipherment himself, and his specific constructed language theory, while influential, remains just one among several competing explanations that continue to divide researchers studying the manuscript today. Various theories have proposed that the text represents an early invented constructed language, a genuine but now extinct natural language transcribed using an unfamiliar alphabet, an elaborate hoax created purely to defraud a wealthy patron centuries ago, or a legitimate but deliberately obscured medical or herbal text written by someone with genuine specialized knowledge who wanted to protect valuable information from being freely accessed by others. Each of these theories has genuine strengths and genuine weaknesses, and none has managed to produce a decipherment that survives serious, sustained scholarly scrutiny once other experts attempt to independently verify the proposed solution. The hoax theory in particular gained some renewed attention in recent decades, with certain researchers proposing the manuscript may have been created specifically to be sold to a wealthy European patron, possibly the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, who is documented to have purchased the manuscript at some point during the early 1600s for a considerable sum, under the false pretense that it represented a genuine ancient work of esoteric wisdom or alchemical knowledge. Critics of this hoax theory point out that creating 240 pages of genuinely consistent, statistically language-like gibberish purely for the purpose of deceiving a single wealthy buyer would itself represent an almost equally extraordinary and labor-intensive achievement, one that seems disproportionate to the relatively modest financial gain such a scheme would have plausibly generated for its creator. What makes the Voynich manuscript such a compelling entry on tonight's list is precisely this tension between its obvious internal consistency, suggesting genuine meaningful content, and its total resistance to every serious decipherment attempt made using the full toolkit of modern cryptographic and linguistic analysis. If this manuscript does encode genuine, meaningful information, whoever created it accomplished something that has successfully defeated some of the most talented codebreakers in history for well over 100 years running. And speaking of technology that seems to arrive too early for its own historical context, a small clay object discovered in Iraq in the 1930s would eventually raise genuinely serious questions about whether the ancient world understood electricity considerably earlier than anyone previously suspected. The Baghdad Battery, ancient electricity, or something else entirely. In 1936, workers excavating near Baghdad, in what is now Iraq, uncovered a small clay pot, roughly 5 inches tall, containing a copper cylinder, and inside that cylinder, evidence of a corroded iron rod, along with traces of what may have been an acidic organic substance like vinegar or wine. The object, believed to date from somewhere between 250 BCE and 650 CE, depending on which archaeological layer it's associated with, would later become known as the Baghdad Battery, after a German archaeologist named Wilhelm König proposed in the late 1930s that the object's specific combination of materials, copper, iron, and an acidic liquid, closely resembled the basic components of a simple electrochemical cell or battery, capable of generating a small electrical charge. König, who served as director of the National Museum of Iraq at the time of his proposal, based his theory partly on the discovery of several similar clay vessels at the same general site, along with iron rods showing corrosion patterns he interpreted as consistent with an acidic electrolyte having once been present inside the copper cylinder, evidence he considered sufficient to propose that these objects represented a deliberately engineered technology for generating small electrical currents, rather than a simple coincidental arrangement of materials serving some entirely different, non-electrical function. König's theory suggested these ancient objects might have been used for electroplating, applying a thin layer of gold or silver onto other metal objects using a mild electrical current, a genuinely practical application that would explain why ancient craftsmen might have wanted to generate small amounts of electricity in the first place. Modern researchers who have built working replicas of the Baghdad battery using the same basic materials have confirmed that such a device absolutely could produce a small electrical current, typically somewhere around 1 volt, when filled with an appropriate acidic liquid like grape juice or vinegar, a modest but genuinely measurable amount of electrical output. A well-known television documentary crew conducted one of the most widely publicized of these replica experiments, successfully using a series of connected replica batteries to generate enough combined electrical current to electroplate a small silver coating onto another metal object, demonstrating conclusively that the basic underlying physics King proposed absolutely does work as described. This successful demonstration, however, only confirms that the device is capable of producing this effect if intentionally used this way. A genuinely important but ultimately separate question from whether the actual ancient people who created and originally used these specific objects understood or intended this particular application themselves. This experimental confirmation is precisely what has kept the mystery alive for so long, since it demonstrates the device is at least physically capable of doing what Koenig originally proposed, even though considerable scholarly disagreement remains regarding whether the ancient people who actually created and used this object understood or intended this specific electrical function at all. Many mainstream archaeologists and historians of science remain genuinely skeptical of the electroplating theory, pointing out that no ancient text from the region describes anything resembling batteries or electricity, and that gold and silver objects from this period and region typically show evidence of more conventional plating techniques, including fire gilding, a well-documented ancient method using mercury amalgam that doesn't require any electrical current at all. An alternative and, according to many specialists, considerably more mundane explanation proposes that these clay vessels actually served as simple storage containers for sacred scrolls, with the metal components serving structural or symbolic rather than electrical purposes, a use consistent with similar vessel constructions found at other sites from the same general region and time period. Proponents of the scroll storage theory point specifically to the fact that similar clay and metal vessel constructions have been found at other Parthian and Sasanian-era sites throughout the region, generally in contexts more consistent with document or scroll storage than with any electrical application, and argue that the copper cylinder's specific dimensions and the way the iron rod sits sealed within it using bitumen would function considerably better as a protective, moisture-resistant scroll case than as a genuinely practical battery, since the iron rod's specific positioning would actually make repeated access, refilling, or maintenance of an active electrochemical cell considerably more difficult and impractical than would be necessary for any genuinely useful ancient electrical application. What keeps the Baghdad battery a genuine, ongoing mystery rather than a settled question is the fact that no additional context, no accompanying wiring, no evidence of connected devices that such a battery might have powered, and no ancient written description of its intended purpose has ever been recovered alongside the object itself. Without that surrounding context, researchers are left interpreting an isolated object using modern scientific frameworks that the object's original creators may or may not have shared, a genuinely difficult interpretive problem that continues to divide serious researchers even today, nearly 90 years after the object was first excavated and brought to public attention. Further complicating the object's history, the original artifact itself has been unavailable for direct restudy by outside researchers for a considerable period, since it was reportedly held within the collections of the Baghdad Museum and later reported missing following the widespread looting that affected the museum during the instability of 2003, meaning much of what modern researchers know about the object depends on earlier photographs, drawings, and written descriptions made before its uncertain current status, adding a genuinely unfortunate additional layer of uncertainty to an already difficult and contested archaeological question. If a small clay pot could generate this much genuine scientific disagreement, an enormous stone platform in modern-day Lebanon, supporting some of the largest cut stones ever moved by human beings anywhere in the ancient world, raises questions of engineering capability that remain even less settled. Baalbek, the largest stones ever moved by human hands. In the Bekaa Valley of modern-day Lebanon sits the ancient site of Baalbek, home to a massive Roman-era temple complex built atop a foundation platform of genuinely staggering scale. Among the enormous stone blocks forming this platform are three specific megaliths, collectively known as the Trilithon, each measuring roughly 60 feet long and weighing an estimated 800 tons apiece, figures that place them among the largest stone blocks ever successfully quarried, transported, and precisely positioned by any civilization in recorded human history. The Trilithon blocks sit roughly 20 feet above the current ground level, meaning that whatever methods Roman-era engineers used to move these enormous stones also had to include some means of lifting them to this considerable height and then precisely sliding them into position alongside their neighbouring blocks with genuinely minimal gaps, an engineering challenge that continues to impress and puzzle researchers studying comparable historical construction techniques, since even well-documented Roman engineering achievements elsewhere in the empire rarely, if ever, involved moving and precisely positioning single stone blocks of this specific extreme mass. As if that weren't remarkable enough, an even larger block, nicknamed the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, or in some translations the Stone of the South, remains partially cut and abandoned in a nearby quarry, never fully separated from the surrounding bedrock or moved to its intended final location. This particular stone is estimated to weigh somewhere around 1,000 tons, and in 2014, archaeologists working at the same quarry uncovered an even larger stone, estimated at approximately 1,650 tons, making it, by a significant margin, the largest stone block ever identified anywhere in the ancient world, dwarfing anything the ancient Egyptians managed to move for their pyramids or obelisks. This 2014 discovery, made by a joint German-Lebanese archaeological research team conducting systematic surveys of the quarry site, genuinely surprised researchers who had assumed the previously known Stone of the Pregnant Woman already represented the practical upper limit of what ancient quarry workers might reasonably have attempted, since this newly identified block lies directly beneath and partially overlapping the older, already documented stone, suggesting ancient engineers may have deliberately attempted an even more ambitious block after already having successfully quarried the smaller, though still genuinely enormous, neighbouring stone, a discovery that continues to reshape scholarly understanding of just how far ancient quarrying ambitions at this specific site were pushed before ultimately being abandoned. The genuine engineering mystery here isn't simply that these stones are large, it's that our understanding of ancient Roman construction technology, however impressive in its own right, doesn't fully and satisfactorily explain how blocks of this specific extreme mass could have been moved the necessary distance from the quarry to their final position, and then precisely positioned with the level of accuracy still visible in the platform today. Roman engineers were certainly capable of moving enormous loads using systems of wooden rollers, ramps, and enormous teams of labourers or draft animals working in careful coordination, and several scholarly reconstructions have proposed plausible methods using purely conventional Roman-era technology. But the sheer scale involved at Baalbek pushes right up against, and by some calculations possibly beyond, the outer practical limits of what ancient engineering, even at its most sophisticated, is generally believed capable of achieving. Adding to the site's mystery is genuine uncertainty regarding exactly when the massive platform itself was originally constructed, as opposed to the more recognizably Roman temple structures built on top of it. Some archaeologists and historians have proposed that the platform's original foundation may predate the Roman temple complex by a considerable margin, potentially incorporating earlier Phoenician religious construction at the same sacred site. Though this remains a genuinely contested question without full scholarly consensus, since the massive scale of the larger stones doesn't perfectly match typical construction techniques securely documented from either the Phoenician or Roman periods specifically. This uncertainty is compounded by the site's long history of continuous religious use and rebuilding, since Baalbek served as a significant sacred site for numerous successive cultures well before the Romans arrived, meaning any earlier foundation work would have been subject to centuries of subsequent modification, expansion, and rebuilding by each successive civilization that took control of the site, gradually obscuring whatever original construction techniques and dating evidence might otherwise have survived to help modern archaeologists resolve this specific question with greater confidence. Modern engineers who have carefully studied Baalbek's construction generally agree that moving stones of this mass, while certainly at the extreme outer edge of what's physically achievable, using purely muscle-powered ancient technology, likely core, capstan systems, and enormous, carefully coordinated labor forces working in and of itself, doesn't actually require anything beyond known ancient engineering principles taken to their absolute practical limit. What remains genuinely unresolved is why any ancient civilization would choose to attempt something this extraordinarily difficult and risky in the first place, when smaller, more manageable stone blocks could have accomplished the same basic architectural and religious purpose with dramatically less labor, expense, and genuine engineering risk involved. Some engineers studying the site have proposed detailed reconstructions involving massive timber cranes, sophisticated systems of capstans and pulleys, and enormous teams of laborers, potentially numbering in the thousands, working in careful, coordinated shifts over an extended period to gradually inch each massive stone into its final position. Calculations that generally suggest the feat, while certainly at the outer limit of ancient capability, remains within the realm of what a sufficiently motivated and well-organized ancient labor force could theoretically achieve without requiring any technology beyond what's already well documented elsewhere in the ancient Roman and pre-Roman world. Some researchers have suggested the sheer scale itself may have been the entire point, a deliberate, almost theatrical demonstration of political and religious power, intended specifically to awe visitors and reinforce the authority of whichever ruler or religious institution commissioned the site's construction, precisely because moving stones this massive was so difficult and so impressive an achievement in its own right. Whether or not this specific motivation is correct, Baalbek remains a genuine engineering puzzle, a site where the stones themselves continue to raise more questions than any surviving historical record has yet managed to answer. If Baalbek shows us the outer limits of what ancient engineers could achieve when building upward and outward, an entirely different kind of ancient site, discovered only recently in the hills of southeastern Turkey, has forced historians to reconsider everything they thought they understood about when human civilization actually began organizing itself around large-scale religious construction in the first place. Göbekli Tepe, the temple that shouldn't exist yet. In the hills of southeastern Turkey sits a site called Göbekli Tepe, a complex of massive carved stone pillars, some standing over 16 feet tall and weighing up to 10 tons, arranged in large circular enclosures and decorated with detailed carvings of animals, including foxes, boars, snakes, and vultures. What makes this site so genuinely disruptive to established archaeological timelines is its age. Göbekli Tepe has been dated to roughly 9,600 BCE, making it well over 6,000 years older than Stonehenge, and predating the invention of pottery, metal tools, writing, and most significantly, agriculture itself. Many of the site's massive T-shaped pillars are carved with distinctly stylized human arms and hands along their sides, suggesting they may represent abstract monumental human or ancestral figures rather than purely decorative architectural columns, an interpretation supported by the specific placement of carved belts and loincloth-style decorative elements found on several of the largest pillars, details that give these otherwise abstract stone monuments a genuinely anthropomorphic quality that continues to inform ongoing scholarly debate regarding the site's specific religious and symbolic function. This last point deserves particular emphasis because it directly contradicts what archaeologists had confidently assumed for well over a century regarding the basic sequence of human civilizational development. The standard historical model held that humans first had to develop settled agriculture, creating stable food surpluses before they could support the specialized labor, religious institutions, and social organization necessary to undertake massive monumental construction projects like Göbekli Tepe. This site appears to reverse that entire sequence, with archaeological evidence suggesting the massive stone construction at Göbekli Tepe was undertaken by hunter-gatherer communities who had not yet developed settled agriculture, raising the genuinely significant possibility that religious ceremony and communal monument building may have actually helped drive the development of settled agriculture, rather than agriculture coming first and enabling monument building only afterward. The site's excavator, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who led research at Göbekli Tepe from the mid-1990s until his death in 2014, argued forcefully that this site represented nothing less than a genuine revolution in how archaeologists needed to understand the origins of organized human religion and civilization, describing it in terms that generated considerable excitement and some genuine scholarly pushback as evidence that the temple came before the city, rather than the more traditional assumption that cities and agricultural surplus came first and monumental religious architecture followed only afterward as a later development. Schmidt's specific interpretation has continued to generate genuine, productive scholarly debate in the years since his death, with some subsequent researchers arguing that Göbekli Tepe's builders may have already been experimenting with early small-scale plant cultivation even before the site's construction, suggesting a somewhat more gradual, overlapping transition between hunting and gathering and settled agriculture than Schmidt's original, more dramatic formulation proposed, though even these more cautious revisions still generally accept the site's fundamental significance in demonstrating that organized monumental construction and religious ceremony predate what earlier archaeological models had confidently assumed was a strict prerequisite of fully settled agricultural life. Adding to the site's mystery, at some point roughly 8000 BCE, the people responsible for Göbekli Tepe made the deliberate decision to bury the entire complex under tons of packed earth and rubble, a genuinely enormous undertaking in its own right, effectively entombing their own monumental religious site rather than simply abandoning it to weather and decay naturally. Archaeologists remain genuinely divided regarding why this deliberate burial occurred, with theories ranging from a religious ritual marking the end of one phase of use before new construction began elsewhere at the site, to a more dramatic possibility that the burial represented an intentional, symbolic decommissioning of a sacred site whose specific religious purpose had, for reasons now lost to history, come to an end. The sheer volume of material used in this deliberate burial, estimated at several hundred cubic meters of packed earth, stone fragments, and animal bone debris for even a single one of the site's several enclosures, suggests the burial itself required an organizational effort roughly comparable to the original construction project, reinforcing the idea that this wasn't a casual, gradual accumulation of wind-blown sediment over centuries, but rather a genuinely deliberate, labor-intensive act undertaken with clear collective purpose by the very community that had originally built and used the site. Whatever the reason, This deliberate burial turned out to be a genuine stroke of archaeological fortune, since the packed earth and rubble protected the massive carved pillars from thousands of years of weathering and erosion that would otherwise have significantly degraded the site's remarkably detailed carvings, preserving Göbekli Tepe in a condition that allowed modern archaeologists to recover an unusually complete and detailed picture of what these ancient hunter-gatherer communities were actually capable of building, thousands of years earlier than anyone had previously believed possible. Less than 5% of the entire Göbekli Tepe site has been excavated so far, meaning the vast majority of whatever additional information this remarkable location might contain remains buried and unexamined. A genuinely tantalizing thought for archaeologists who recognize that each new excavation season at this single site has already fundamentally reshaped scientific understanding of when and how organized human civilization actually began. If a single site in Turkey could push back the entire timeline of monumental human construction by thousands of years, an enormous set of caverns carved into solid rock in eastern China raises an entirely different kind of question. Not when they were built, but why anyone would undertake such an enormous engineering project and then leave absolutely no written record explaining their purpose at all. The Longyu Caves, an engineering marvel with no historical record. In 1992, villagers in Longyu County, in China's Zhejiang province, decided to drain several ponds that local tradition held were simply bottomless, hoping to finally settle the matter using modern pumping equipment. What they discovered underneath the water was genuinely extraordinary, a network of enormous, carefully carved underground caverns, some large enough to hold hundreds of people, with smooth walls, evenly spaced parallel chisel marks covering nearly every surface in a remarkably consistent decorative pattern, and support pillars deliberately left in place to hold up the cavern ceilings, all of it carved directly out of solid sandstone bedrock. The pumping operation itself took local villagers and hired workers several months of continuous effort to fully drain the largest of these ponds. And once the water level had dropped sufficiently, researchers were genuinely startled by both the scale of the excavated chamber revealed beneath and by the remarkably good condition of the carved walls, which had apparently been protected from weathering and erosion for centuries by the very water that had also successfully hidden their existence from public knowledge and formal archaeological documentation for so long. Since this initial 1992 discovery, at least 24 separate caverns have been identified in the immediate area, some reaching depths of 30 meters below the surface and covering floor areas exceeding 1,000 square meters each, representing a truly staggering amount of excavated material, estimated by some researchers at hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of solid rock removed entirely by hand using nothing but ancient hand tools. Engineers who have studied the structural design of the caverns note that the builders left carefully calculated support pillars in specific, evenly distributed positions throughout each chamber, a level of structural engineering foresight that suggests genuine advanced planning rather than simple ad hoc excavation, since removing material without proper structural support in a cavern of this scale would have risked catastrophic ceiling collapse, a risk the original builders clearly understood and successfully planned around using load-bearing calculations that modern engineers consider genuinely sophisticated for a project undertaken using only simple hand tools and presumably empirical trial and error experience passed down across successive generations of workers. What makes the Longyu Caves such a genuine and persistent mystery is the almost complete absence of any historical documentation referencing their construction. Despite China's extraordinarily long and detailed tradition of historical record-keeping, stretching back thousands of years and covering an enormous range of administrative, religious, and everyday topics in genuinely meticulous detail, no surviving Chinese historical text makes any clear, unambiguous reference to the construction of these specific caverns, their intended purpose, or the enormous workforce that must have been required to complete such an ambitious excavation project. Radiocarbon dating and stylistic analysis of tool marks found within the caves suggest a construction date sometime during China's Ming dynasty, or possibly earlier, though considerable uncertainty remains regarding the precise dating, since no organic material suitable for reliable radiocarbon analysis has been recovered directly from within the caverns themselves, leaving researchers to rely primarily on comparative analysis of toolmark patterns and construction techniques rather than a definitive scientific date. Various theories have been proposed to explain the cave's original purpose, including use as ancient quarries specifically intended to extract building stone for other construction projects in the surrounding region, a theory that would help explain the sheer scale of material removed but doesn't fully account for the remarkably uniform, deliberately decorative chisel patterns covering the walls, which seem to go well beyond what would be functionally necessary for simple stone extraction. Other researchers have proposed the caves may have served as secret military storage facilities, royal tombs, or some form of underground palace or refuge, though no clear physical evidence, including tomb goods, military equipment, or identifiable royal architecture, has been recovered from within any of the caverns to definitively support these alternative theories. Some local historians have specifically connected the caves to the historical Wu Yue Kingdom, a regional power that controlled this area of China during the 10th century, proposing the caverns may have served as a well-hidden strategic resource, either for military supply storage or as an emergency refuge for the ruling elite during a period of considerable regional instability and warfare. Though this specific historical connection, like every other proposed explanation for the site, remains a plausible but ultimately unconfirmed hypothesis rather than a definitively established historical fact supported by direct documentary evidence. The sheer scale of labor required to excavate these caverns using only hand tools presents its own genuine engineering puzzle, since researchers estimating the total volume of removed stone suggest the project would have required an enormous, sustained workforce laboring for years, if not decades, representing exactly the kind of massive public works project that would typically generate substantial administrative and historical documentation in a civilization as thoroughly literate and bureaucratically organized as Imperial China. The near-total absence of any such documentary trail remains, even today, one of the most genuinely puzzling aspects of this entire site. This documentary silence stands in genuine, striking contrast to how thoroughly Chinese imperial bureaucracy typically recorded major public works projects throughout its long history, including detailed records of labor conscription, material sourcing, and construction timelines for projects like the Grand Canal and various sections of the Great Wall, making the complete absence of any comparable record for a project of Longyu's genuine scale feel like a genuine, meaningful anomaly rather than simply an unremarkable gap in an otherwise incomplete historical record, since Imperial China's documentary tradition was specifically thorough and consistent enough that a project of this magnitude would ordinarily be expected to leave at least some administrative trace behind. If an engineering project this massive could vanish so completely from written historical record in a civilization famous for its meticulous documentation, it raises fair questions about what else might be hiding in plain sight, waiting simply for someone to finally drain the right pond. And speaking of things hiding in plain sight, one of the most famous monuments in the entire ancient world has a face that doesn't match its supposed age, according to a persistent and genuinely serious scientific debate that continues among geologists today. The Great Sphinx, a genuine debate about its true age. The Great Sphinx of Giza, carved from a single massive outcrop of limestone bedrock on the Giza Plateau in Egypt, is conventionally dated by mainstream Egyptologists to the reign of the pharaoh Khafre, sometime around 2500 BCE, based primarily on stylistic connections between the Sphinx's facial features and other confirmed statues of Khafre found at the same site, along with the monument's clear architectural integration into the wider Giza pyramid complex. This conventional dating is further supported by an inscribed stone slab known as the Dream Stele, placed between the Sphinx's paws by a later pharaoh named Thutmose IV, which describes a dream in which the Sphinx itself, addressed as a divine being, promised Thutmose the throne of Egypt in exchange for clearing away the sand that had already buried much of the monument by that later period. A text that, while composed roughly 1,000 years after the monument's conventionally accepted construction date, references the Sphinx as an already ancient and revered monument requiring restoration, evidence most Egyptologists consider broadly consistent with, rather than contradictory to, the standard Khafre-era dating. This conventional dating has been genuinely challenged, however, by a smaller but persistent group of geologists who point to a specific, and they argue, genuinely significant physical feature of the monument itself: distinctive vertical fissures and rolling, undulating, weathering patterns visible on the Sphinx's body and the surrounding enclosure walls. Patterns these researchers argue are consistent specifically with prolonged water erosion, rather than the wind and sand erosion that would be expected if the monument had spent its entire existence in Egypt's current extremely dry desert climate. The most prominent proponent of this water erosion theory, a geologist named Robert Schoch, has argued that this specific weathering pattern would require a considerably wetter climate than Egypt has experienced at any point since roughly 5000 BCE, potentially pushing the Sphinx's true age back several thousand years earlier than the conventional Khafre-era dating into a period before Egyptian civilization, as conventionally understood by historians, had developed the kind of organized labor force and architectural sophistication necessary to undertake a monumental carving project of this scale. Schoch, a professor of natural sciences who first began studying the Sphinx's weathering patterns in the late 1980s in collaboration with independent researcher John Anthony West, based his conclusions on careful comparison between the specific erosion patterns visible on the Sphinx enclosure walls and known examples of both water erosion and wind erosion documented at other geological sites, arguing the rounded, flowing quality of the weathering pattern at the Sphinx enclosure differs meaningfully from the more angular, differential erosion patterns typically produced by wind-blown sand acting on the same type of limestone bedrock over comparable timeframes. This water erosion hypothesis has generated genuine, serious scientific controversy since it was first proposed in the late 1980s and early 1990s, with the overwhelming majority of professional Egyptologists and many geologists rejecting the theory, arguing instead that the specific weathering patterns observed can be adequately explained through a combination of wind-driven sand erosion, salt weathering caused by groundwater seeping upward through the porous limestone and then evaporating at the surface, and simple chemical weathering of the specific type of soft, easily eroded limestone from which the Sphinx was originally carved, without requiring any change to the conventional climate history of the region or any radical revision of Egypt's established archaeological timeline. Critics of the water erosion theory also point out that no independent archaeological evidence, including pottery, tools, or any other physical artifacts consistent with an earlier, pre-dynastic Egyptian civilization capable of undertaking monumental stone carving, has ever been discovered anywhere in Egypt corresponding to the much earlier date the water erosion theory would require, a genuinely significant gap in supporting evidence that mainstream Egyptologists consider a serious and largely unaddressed weakness in the alternative dating proposal. Additional geological criticism of the Schoch hypothesis points out that the specific limestone layers from which the Sphinx was carved vary considerably in hardness and composition across the height of the monument, meaning different sections of the same statue would naturally weather at noticeably different rates even when exposed to identical environmental conditions over an identical span of time. A factor that critics argue shocks original analysis didn't adequately account for when comparing weathering patterns across different sections of the enclosure walls, potentially explaining at least some of the specific erosion features he originally attributed to prolonged water exposure through this simpler, more conventional geological explanation instead. Despite this substantial scholarly pushback, the core geological observation that the Sphinx does show weathering patterns that at least some qualified geologists interpret as more consistent with water erosion than wind erosion has never been fully and definitively resolved to the satisfaction of every specialist examining the site, keeping this specific debate alive as a genuine, ongoing point of scientific disagreement rather than a fully settled question, even as the vast majority of professional Egyptologists remain confident in the conventional Khafra era, dating based on the broader weight of archaeological and art historical evidence available. The Sphinx's true age may never be fully and universally settled to every researcher's complete satisfaction, but its weathered face nonetheless continues to raise fair questions about just how much we genuinely know about the climate and civilization of Egypt during the many thousands of years before its more thoroughly documented dynastic history begins. This uncertainty extends even to more mundane questions about the monument, including the original appearance of its now largely missing nose, commonly but almost certainly inaccurately attributed to cannon fire from Napoleon's troops during their Egyptian campaign, when in fact earlier historical illustrations and written accounts from centuries before Napoleon's arrival already depict the Sphinx without its nose, suggesting the damage occurred considerably earlier, likely through a combination of natural weathering and possible deliberate defacement, the exact circumstances of which remain, like so much else about this ancient monument, genuinely unresolved, despite centuries of documented observation and study by visitors, scholars, and archaeologists alike. And while the Sphinx's mystery revolves around questions of dating and climate, an entirely different kind of ancient puzzle, involving a set of small clay discs supposedly recovered from a remote Chinese cave system, would go on to become one of the most widely circulated and most thoroughly disputed stories in all of alternative archaeology. The Dropa stones, a legend built on almost no evidence. According to a story that first began circulating in various popular publications during the 1960s, a set of several hundred circular stone discs, each one featuring a spiral groove etched with tiny, unfamiliar characters, was supposedly discovered in a remote cave system in the Bayan Ha mountain range of China, allegedly alongside ancient skeletal remains belonging to unusually small-statured individuals. According to the popular legend, these so-called Dropa stones, once analysed, were found to contain unusual concentrations of cobalt and other metallic elements, and the tiny inscribed characters, once decoded, supposedly told a story of a crashed extraterrestrial spacecraft and its surviving occupants living among local villagers thousands of years ago. The story appears to have first gained wider circulation through a series of publications by an Austrian-Swiss author writing under various pen names during the mid to late 1960s, and subsequent retellings across different popular magazines and books progressively added new details and embellishments to the original account, a pattern of escalating, unverified elaboration that researchers studying the spread of this kind of popular legend have noted as genuinely characteristic of how these stories tend to develop and grow more dramatic over successive retellings, even as the underlying verifiable evidence supporting the core claims remains genuinely non-existent throughout the entire process. It's important to be genuinely direct and factual about this particular story, since unlike every other entry on tonight's list, the Dropa stones legend suffers from an almost complete absence of verifiable primary evidence supporting its most dramatic and widely repeated claims. No independently verified photograph of an actual inscribed Dropa stone has ever been published in any credible scientific or archaeological source. No museum, university, or research institution has ever produced a physical stone disc from this story for outside researchers to independently examine, test, or verify. The original sources for the story itself trace back primarily to sensationalized popular magazine articles from the 1960s, rather than any peer-reviewed archaeological publication or verifiable museum collection record. Professional archaeologists and historians who have investigated the origins of this story generally conclude that the Dropa stone's legend appears to have been substantially embellished and quite possibly invented outright by popular writers working within the flourishing genre of ancient astronaut and mystery publishing that became genuinely popular throughout the 1960s and 1970s, a period that produced numerous similarly dramatic claims about ancient extraterrestrial contact that have since been thoroughly examined and found to rest on extremely thin or entirely absent physical evidence. Once researchers actually attempted to trace the story back to verifiable original sources. Given the near-total absence of verifiable primary evidence, most serious archaeologists and historians of science do not consider the Dropa stones a genuine, unresolved archaeological mystery in the same category as the other entries covered tonight, so much as a compelling piece of 20th century popular folklore that continues to circulate widely online, often presented without any of this crucial context regarding its extremely questionable evidentiary foundation. It's genuinely worth including this specific example on tonight's list, not because it represents an authentic unsolved mystery in the way the Antikythera mechanism or Göbekli Tepe clearly do, but because it offers a genuinely useful contrast, illustrating the real, meaningful difference between a mystery grounded in solid, physically verifiable evidence that remains difficult to interpret, and a popular legend built primarily on unverifiable claims, sensationalized retelling, and a near-total absence of the kind of physical evidence that would allow independent researchers to actually test its central claims. This distinction matters considerably beyond just this single example, since it offers a genuinely useful framework for evaluating any claim of ancient mystery encountered outside tonight's video as well. Does the claim rest on physical evidence that independent researchers can directly examine, test, and verify for themselves? Or does it rest primarily on second-hand retelling, unverifiable sourcing, and claims that grow more dramatic with each successive popular account, without any corresponding increase in the actual underlying physical evidence available for genuine scientific scrutiny? Having drawn that important distinction, it's time to return to genuinely verified, physically confirmed mysteries, beginning with a collection of hundreds of nearly perfect stone spheres scattered across the jungles of Costa Rica, whose method of creation remains a genuine scientific puzzle, even though the objects themselves are absolutely real, extensively documented, and held today in verified museum collections around the world. The stone spheres of Costa Rica, perfect circles with no clear purpose. Beginning in the 1930s, workers clearing land for banana plantations in the Diquis Delta region of southern Costa Rica began uncovering an extraordinary collection of stone spheres, ranging in size from just a few inches across to an astonishing 8 feet in diameter, with some of the largest examples weighing well over 15 tons. More than 300 of these spheres have since been documented across the region, carved primarily from granodiorite, gabbro, and limestone, depending on which locally available stone type happened to be closest to a given production site. The banana company workers who first encountered these spheres during land clearing operations initially had no formal archaeological training or guidance, and considerable damage to the original archaeological context occurred during this early period, before Costa Rican authorities and international archaeologists became sufficiently involved to establish proper protective and documentation protocols for the remaining undisturbed spheres and their surrounding sites. A genuinely unfortunate loss of contextual information that continues to complicate modern research into the sphere's original arrangement and purpose. What makes these spheres such a genuine and lasting archaeological puzzle isn't simply their existence, but their extraordinary precision. Detailed measurement of the best preserved examples reveals a level of spherical accuracy that would be genuinely impressive even using modern industrial machining tools, let alone the comparatively simple stoneworking technology available to the pre-Columbian peoples who created them sometime between roughly 600 and 1500 CE, according to the most reliable archaeological dating evidence recovered from the surrounding sites. Archaeologists studying the production process believe the spheres were likely created by starting with a naturally rounded boulder, then carefully removing material through a painstaking combination of controlled fracturing using fire and rapid cooling to crack away unwanted material in manageable sections, followed by extensive grinding and polishing using harder abrasive stones, a process that would have required an enormous investment of skilled labour and time for even a single sphere, let alone the hundreds that have survived to the present day. Detailed measurement surveys conducted on the best preserved spheres reveal that most examples deviate from a mathematically perfect sphere by less than a few % across their entire surface, an extraordinary level of precision to achieve using purely manual grinding and polishing techniques without any mechanical measuring tools beyond simple chords and straight edges, a level of craftsmanship that required stoneworkers to develop and pass down across many generations, a genuinely sophisticated, intuitive understanding of geometric form and careful, iterative measurement technique. The genuine mystery surrounding these objects centers less on how they were physically created, since the basic stoneworking techniques involved, while impressive, fall within the known technological capabilities of the pre-Columbian cultures of this region, and considerably more on exactly why any community would invest this staggering amount of collective effort into producing objects that appear to have served no clear, practical, everyday function. Archaeological excavation has found the spheres arranged in deliberate patterns, including straight lines and geometric formations at several sites, suggesting genuine ceremonial or social significance, possibly connected to marking important astronomical alignments, denoting social status and rank within the community, or serving some specific religious or political function that has been almost entirely lost, since the pre-Columbian cultures responsible for their creation left behind no surviving written records explaining their purpose in their own words. Some of the best preserved arrangements, discovered at a site now protected as part of the Dikis Delta Archaeological Zone, show spheres of graduated size positioned in careful formation alongside the foundations of what appear to be residential or ceremonial structures, suggesting the spheres may have served as a visible marker of a particular settlement's status or importance within a wider regional network of communities, with larger, more impressive sphere displays potentially indicating greater wealth, political influence, or ceremonial significance, though this interpretation, like every other proposed explanation, remains an informed hypothesis rather than a definitively confirmed historical fact. Adding to the difficulty of interpreting these objects today, a significant number of the spheres were removed from their original locations and contexts during the 20th century, some destroyed entirely by banana plantation workers using dynamite in the mistaken belief that valuable gold might be hidden inside them, and others relocated to serve as decorative lawn ornaments or tourist attractions without any careful archaeological documentation of their original positioning relative to one another or to other nearby structures, permanently destroying crucial contextual evidence that might otherwise have helped researchers definitively determine their original intended purpose. The stone spheres of Costa Rica were formally recognized by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site in 2014, specifically in recognition of their outstanding universal value and the urgent need to protect the relatively small number of spheres still remaining in their original, undisturbed archaeological context from further disturbance, looting, or accidental destruction. Even with this formal international recognition and ongoing protective efforts, the fundamental question of exactly why these particular pre-Columbian communities invested so much time and skilled labor into creating hundreds of nearly perfect stone spheres remains even today a genuinely open scientific question without a single, universally accepted answer. If a scattered collection of stone spheres in Central America can raise this much unresolved scientific interest, an enormous stone platform on a Peruvian desert plateau, one we've touched on before in a different context, continues to generate entirely new theories about its true purpose, even after nearly a full century of dedicated archaeological study. The Nazca Lines, still no single agreed explanation. Along the arid coastal plain of southern Peru, between roughly 100 BCE and 800 CE, the Nazca civilization created one of the most visually striking archaeological sites anywhere in the world. An enormous collection of geometric shapes, perfectly straight lines stretching for miles across the desert floor, and detailed figurative designs depicting animals including a hummingbird, a monkey, a spider, and a condor. Some of these figures measuring several hundred feet across, so large that their true form only became fully apparent after the invention of powered flight allowed observers to view them properly from the air for the first time. Commercial airline pilots flying over the region during the 1920s were reportedly among the very first people in the modern era to notice unusual markings on the desert floor below, though it wasn't until the 1930s and 1940s that dedicated archaeological researchers, including American historian Paul Kosok and later the German-born mathematician Maria Reiche, began the painstaking work of properly surveying, mapping, and documenting the full extent of the line network from the ground, a project that would eventually consume much of Reiche's own life, as she dedicated herself for decades to studying, mapping, and actively protecting the site from encroaching development and careless tourism. Despite nearly a century of dedicated archaeological research, since these lines were first systematically studied by outside researchers in the 1930s and 1940s, no single explanation for their purpose has achieved anything close to full scholarly consensus, an unusual and genuinely persistent situation for a site this extensively studied by professional archaeologists, using increasingly sophisticated research methods over multiple generations. One prominent theory, developed extensively by researcher Maria Reiche, who dedicated much of her life to studying and preserving the lines during the 20th century, proposed an astronomical purpose, suggesting the lines and figures marked the positions of significant celestial events like solstices or the rising points of important stars. Systematic studies attempting to verify consistent astronomical alignments across the full collection of lines, however, have produced genuinely mixed results, with some individual lines showing plausible alignment to specific celestial events, while the vast majority show no clear or consistent astronomical correspondence at all, undermining any theory proposing a single, comprehensive astronomical purpose covering every line at the site. Reiche herself continued refining and defending her astronomical interpretation across several decades of dedicated fieldwork, even as subsequent statistical analysis conducted by other researchers using more rigorous methodology gradually cast increasing doubt on the comprehensive version of her original theory. Another significant theory connects the lines to water and agricultural fertility rituals, proposing that many of the lines may have functioned as ceremonial pathways connected to rituals seeking to ensure adequate water supply in this notoriously arid region, potentially linking to underground aqueduct systems called puquios that the Nazca people are known to have engineered to bring water from underground sources to their settlements and farmland. This theory has gained considerable traction in recent decades, supported by the discovery that many lines appear to converge toward or align with these known underground water sources, though it still doesn't fully explain every geometric pattern and figure found across the wider site. The Puquios themselves represent a genuinely impressive feat of ancient hydraulic engineering in their own right, consisting of carefully angled underground channels designed to intercept groundwater and direct it toward the surface at strategic points, a system that remains partially functional and in limited local use even today, more than 1,000 years after its original construction, a testament to just how sophisticated Nazca water management technology genuinely was, quite apart from the separate mystery of the lines themselves. A more recent theory, developed by researchers studying the broader context of Nazca religious practice and ritual behavior, suggests the lines may have functioned primarily as ceremonial walkways used during religious processions, possibly connected to worship of mountain deities believed to control rainfall, with participants walking the lines as part of religious ceremonies rather than the lines being intended primarily for viewing from any single vantage point, aerial or otherwise. Where patterns detected along certain lines, consistent with repeated foot traffic over an extended period, lend some genuine physical support to this particular theory, though it still leaves open the question of why the Nazca invested such enormous effort into creating figures whose full pictorial form isn't easily visible from ground level at all. What makes the Nazca lines such a persistent scientific puzzle, even after decades of dedicated research using satellite imagery, aerial photography, and detailed on-the-ground archaeological survey, is precisely this combination of multiple plausible, partially supported theories, none of which fully accounts for every single feature found across the site's enormous and genuinely varied collection of lines and figures. It's entirely possible and increasingly accepted by researchers studying the site today that the true answer involves several of these purposes operating simultaneously: astronomical, ceremonial, and hydrological significance, all overlapping within a single complex religious tradition that the Nazca people themselves never left behind any written explanation to clarify for future generations. If a site studied this extensively for nearly a century can still generate such genuine scientific disagreement, an enormous prehistoric stone circle in the English countryside, one of the most recognizable ancient monuments on the entire planet, continues to raise its own equally persistent questions about exactly how its massive stones were transported across such an enormous distance using nothing but Stone Age technology. Stonehenge, the 200-mile mystery. Stonehenge, the massive stone circle standing on Salisbury Plain in southern England, remains one of the most thoroughly studied prehistoric monuments anywhere in the world, with construction believed to have occurred in several distinct phases spanning roughly 3000 to 1500 BCE. Despite this extensive research, spanning centuries of dedicated archaeological attention from some of the field's most accomplished researchers, genuine and significant mysteries about the site remain entirely unresolved. The monument's construction history, as currently understood by archaeologists, appears to have begun with a simpler circular earthwork enclosure and ditch, built around 3000 BCE, with the massive stone elements most people picture when they think of Stonehenge actually added considerably later, in several distinct subsequent phases spanning several additional centuries, meaning the monument we recognize today represents the accumulated result of many successive generations of builders, each apparently modifying and expanding the site according to their own specific religious and ceremonial needs, rather than a single unified construction project completed according to one consistent original design. The monument's largest stones, called sarsens, weighing up to 25 tons each, were sourced from quarries located roughly 20 miles away, a genuinely impressive transportation achievement in its own right for a Neolithic society, without wheeled vehicles or draft animals suitable for hauling loads of this mass. But it's Stonehenge's smaller stones, known as bluestones, weighing a comparatively modest 2 to 5 tons each, that present the monument's most genuinely puzzling transportation mystery, since geological analysis has definitively traced their specific mineral composition back to quarries in the Preseli Hills of Wales, located roughly 180 to 200 miles away from Stonehenge's actual location on Salisbury Plain. This distance, covering difficult terrain including hills, rivers, and, depending on the specific route taken, potentially open coastal water, represents a transportation challenge that continues to generate genuine scholarly debate regarding the exact method used to move these stones across such an enormous distance using only Neolithic-era technology. Some researchers have proposed an overland route using wooden sledges and log rollers, requiring an enormous, sustained, and carefully coordinated labour force working over a period of many months or even years to move the stones the necessary distance. Other researchers have proposed at least part of the journey was accomplished by water, using rafts to transport the stones along rivers and around the Welsh coastline before a final overland leg brought them to Salisbury Plain, a route that would reduce the physical labour of overland hauling but would introduce its own genuine risks and logistical challenges involving the construction and navigation of stone-laden rafts across open or semi-open water. Experimental archaeology projects attempting to test both proposed transportation methods have produced genuinely useful, if not fully conclusive, results, with reconstructed sledge and roller systems successfully moving replica stones of comparable weight across level ground using surprisingly modest teams of people, while separate experiments testing raft-based water transport have demonstrated the basic feasibility of the approach while also highlighting the genuine risks involved, including the very real danger of losing an irreplaceable stone. Entirely should a raft capsize or founder during the crossing, a risk that would have made the water route a genuinely serious gamble for any Neolithic community attempting it with their sacred stones. Recent archaeological research has added a genuinely fascinating new wrinkle to this already complex mystery, with evidence suggesting some of Stonehenge's bluestones may have originally been part of an earlier stone circle actually constructed in Wales, near the original quarry sites themselves, before being deliberately dismantled and transported to their current location on Salisbury Plain, rather than being quarried fresh and transported directly to Stonehenge in a single continuous construction project. If confirmed through further research, this would suggest an even more logistically complex, multi-stage construction history than previously understood, involving not just the transportation of raw quarried stone, but the deliberate disassembly and long-distance relocation of an entire existing monument. This particular theory emerged from detailed excavation of a Welsh site called Waun Morn, where archaeologists identified stone sockets matching the specific dimensions of several Stonehenge bluestones, along with radiocarbon dates suggesting this Welsh circle was dismantled at roughly the same time. Stonehenge itself was undergoing one of its major documented construction phases, a genuinely compelling, if not yet universally accepted, piece of circumstantial evidence supporting the idea that Stonehenge may represent, at least in part, a relocated monument rather than an entirely original construction using freshly quarried stone. Beyond the genuine transportation mystery, researchers also continue to debate Stonehenge's precise original purpose, with evidence supporting multiple possible functions operating simultaneously across the monument's long, multi-phase construction history, including use as an astronomical observatory tracking solstice alignments, a burial ground evidenced by cremated human remains recovered from within the site, and a significant ceremonial gathering place evidenced by nearby settlement, remains and feasting debris suggesting large seasonal gatherings of people travelling from considerable distances specifically to participate in ceremonies at the site. What makes Stonehenge such a persistent and genuine scientific mystery, despite centuries of dedicated study by some of archaeology's most accomplished researchers, is this same combination we've already seen at several other sites tonight. Multiple partially supported theories, none of which fully and definitively explains every single aspect of the monument's construction, purpose, and remarkable, multi-stage building history. And speaking of monuments whose true purpose remains genuinely disputed, a set of massive granite slabs erected in rural Georgia during the 20th century has generated its own entirely modern mystery, one involving an anonymous benefactor whose true identity has never been definitively established. The Georgia Guidestones, a modern monument with an anonymous creator. In 1980, a mysterious man using the pseudonym R.C. Christian approached a granite company in Elberton, Georgia, requesting the construction of a massive monument paid for entirely in cash and commissioned on behalf of a group he described only as a small group of loyal Americans who wished to remain permanently anonymous. The resulting structure, which came to be known as the Georgia Guidestones, consisted of 4 large granite slabs, each standing over 16 feet tall, arranged around a central pillar with a capstone on top, the entire structure engineered with genuine astronomical precision, including a hole through the central column aligned to track the North Star, and slots cut to mark the sun's position at the solstices and equinoxes throughout the year. The Elberton Granite Finishing Company, the local business commissioned to actually carve and construct the monument, reportedly conducted its own due diligence before agreeing to the unusual project, including verifying through a local bank that sufficient funds genuinely existed to cover the substantial cost of the commission, though the bank representative involved was apparently also bound by the same confidentiality arrangement and never publicly revealed any further identifying details about the mysterious client behind the pseudonym R.C. Christian. Carved into the massive stone slabs in 8 different languages, including English, Spanish, Swahili, Hindi, Hebrew, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian, was a set of 10 guiding principles covering topics ranging from maintaining humanity's population at a sustainable level to preserving racial and cultural diversity, promoting rational thinking over blind faith, and protecting nature and the wider environment. An additional, shorter inscription in 4 ancient languages, including Babylonian cuneiform, Classical Greek, Sanskrit, and Egyptian hieroglyphics, identified the structure simply as a guide stone. The specific choice of these 8 modern languages, along with the 4 ancient languages included in the shorter supplementary inscription, has itself generated considerable speculation among researchers who have studied the monument, since the selection doesn't correspond neatly to any obvious, easily explained criteria like the world's most widely spoken languages or the official languages of the United Nations, leading some researchers to suggest the choices may have reflected the personal background, education, or specific philosophical priorities of the anonymous R.C. Christian himself, though without his true identity ever being confirmed. This particular detail, like so much else about the monument, remains a matter of informed speculation rather than settled fact. The identity of R.C. Christian, the mysterious individual who commissioned and funded this entire project, has never been definitively established, despite genuine journalistic and amateur investigative efforts spanning several decades. The monument's designer reportedly insisted on complete anonymity as a condition of the commission, communicating with the granite company primarily through a lawyer and paying for the entire project, along with an ongoing maintenance fund, using funds that were never conclusively traced back to any specific, publicly identified individual or organization. Various theories regarding the Guidestones' true purpose and the identity of their anonymous sponsor have circulated widely since the monument's original 1980 dedication ceremony, ranging from the straightforward, if unverifiable, possibility that the stones genuinely represented the sincere, if eccentric, philosophical project of a single wealthy individual or small group hoping to leave behind guidance for a hypothetical future civilization following some kind of global catastrophe, to considerably more elaborate and largely unsubstantiated theories connecting the monument to various secretive organizations, none of which have ever been definitively confirmed through any verified documentary evidence. The Georgia Guidestones became the subject of genuine, sustained public controversy over the following decades, with some religious and political groups objecting strongly to specific inscribed principles, particularly language, some interpreted as advocating population control measures, leading to periodic vandalism of the site, and calls from various local political figures for its removal entirely. This entire ongoing controversy came to an abrupt and permanent end in July 2022, when an explosive device destroyed a significant portion of the monument during the early morning hours, an act of deliberate destruction captured partially on security camera footage, but whose perpetrator has never been definitively identified or apprehended despite an active law enforcement investigation. Following the explosion, the severely damaged remaining structure was demolished entirely for safety reasons, permanently ending the physical existence of a monument whose original purpose and anonymous funding source had already remained a genuine, unresolved mystery for more than 4 decades before its destruction. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation, which led the resulting inquiry, released security footage showing a vehicle approaching the monument shortly before the explosion, along with a description of the vehicle itself. But despite offering a substantial reward for information leading to an arrest, the case remains formally unsolved, adding one final, genuinely modern layer of mystery to a monument that had already spent more than 40 years generating unanswered questions regarding its true purpose and its anonymous benefactor's actual identity. The Georgia Guidestones offer a genuinely unusual entry on tonight's list, a mystery from the recent past rather than deep antiquity, but one that nonetheless demonstrates that genuine unresolved mysteries regarding motive, identity, and purpose aren't limited exclusively to the ancient world and can emerge and persist even in an era of extensive documentation, journalism, and modern investigative techniques. And returning now to genuine antiquity, a small clay disc discovered on the island of Crete contains a script so unusual that it appears nowhere else in the entire archaeological record, anywhere in the world, making it one of the most singularly isolated written artifacts ever recovered by archaeologists. The Phaistos disc, a script that appears only once. In 1908, Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier, excavating the ruins of the Minoan palace complex at Phaistos on the island of Crete, uncovered a small circular clay disc, roughly 6 inches in diameter, covered on both sides with a spiral sequence of stamped hieroglyphic-style symbols. The disc, believed to date from somewhere around 1700 BCE, contains a total of 241 individual symbol impressions, formed using a set of 45 distinct hieroglyphic-style stamps, arranged in a continuous spiral pattern running from the disc's outer edge inward toward its center. Pernier discovered the disc within a basement storage room of the Minoan palace complex, alongside a tablet inscribed in Linear A, the still largely undeciphered Minoan script we discussed earlier in connection with the Minoan civilization more broadly, providing at least some clear archaeological context confirming the disc's genuine association with confirmed Minoan-era palace occupation, even though the disc's own specific script bears no direct resemblance to either Linear A or the later, successfully deciphered Linear B writing system used by the Mycenaean Greeks, who eventually took control of Crete. What makes the Phaistos disc such a genuinely unique and persistent mystery is the simple fact that this particular script, whatever it represents, has never been found anywhere else, on any other artifact, anywhere in the entire archaeological record, either on Crete itself or anywhere else in the ancient Mediterranean world. Every other ancient script we have any hope of eventually deciphering, including Egyptian hieroglyphics, Mesopotamian cuneiform, and even the Minoans' own separate Linear A and Linear B writing systems, exists across multiple surviving examples, providing researchers with enough comparative material to identify recurring patterns, common words, and grammatical structures. The Phaistos disc stands entirely alone, a single surviving example of a script that appears nowhere else, making any confident, verifiable decipherment genuinely, perhaps permanently, out of reach using standard linguistic and cryptographic methods that depend on comparing multiple examples of the same writing system. Among the 45 distinct symbols identified on the disc, researchers have recognized several recognizable pictographic images, including a walking human figure, a fish, a bird, a shield, and what appears to be a plumed or feathered helmet, imagery that suggests some genuine connection to the broader visual and symbolic vocabulary of Bronze Age Aegean culture, even though the specific combination and arrangement of these particular symbols into a coherent written message remains entirely unresolved, since recognizing individual pictographic elements within a script provides considerably less decoding value than being able to establish the actual phonetic or grammatical function each symbol serves within complete, readable sentences. The disc's manufacturing method itself adds an additional layer of genuine historical significance to the mystery, since the symbols weren't hand-carved individually, as was typical for other ancient scripts of this general period, but rather stamped into the wet clay using a set of pre-made character stamps, a technique that some historians consider an extremely early precursor to the basic principle behind movable type printing, developed independently many thousands of years before Johannes Gutenberg's famous printing press in 15th century Europe. This manufacturing sophistication makes the complete isolation of the disc's script even more genuinely puzzling, since it suggests a level of intentional, deliberate craftsmanship that seems inconsistent with a purely one-off, experimental object never intended for wider use or replication. If the Phaistos disc's creators genuinely developed a reusable set of stamps specifically to produce written text, this implies they anticipated creating multiple documents using this same script, making the complete absence of any other surviving example genuinely difficult to explain through simple historical accident alone, since a technology developed specifically for repeated reuse would ordinarily be expected to leave behind at least some additional surviving examples, even accounting for the inevitable losses and destruction that occur to organic and inorganic materials alike across more than 3,500 years of subsequent history. Numerous researchers over the past century have proposed decipherments of the Phaistos disc, variously suggesting it represents a religious hymn, a magical or ritual incantation, a military record, or even, according to a handful of more speculative theories, evidence of contact with a foreign trading culture from outside the immediate Aegean region entirely. None of these proposed decipherments has achieved anything approaching broad scholarly consensus, and the fundamental problem, the complete absence of any comparative material to verify a proposed reading against, remains entirely unresolved, regardless of how clever or internally consistent any individual proposed decipherment might appear on its own terms. Some researchers have even raised genuine, serious questions about whether the disc might be a modern forgery created sometime in the early 20th century, specifically to deceive archaeologists, though the overwhelming majority of specialists who have examined the object directly consider it authentic, based on detailed analysis of the clay composition, the firing technique used to harden it, and its clear archaeological context within the excavated palace ruins at Phaistos, a site with an extensive, well-documented history of genuine Minoan occupation and construction. Whether the Phaistos disc ultimately represents a genuine, meaningful text whose specific message has simply been lost to the total absence of comparative material, or something else entirely, it remains, well over a century after its discovery, one of the most tantalizing and most thoroughly unresolved written artifacts recovered from the entire ancient world. And from a script that exists in complete isolation, we turn now to a map that appears to show coastlines its supposed creator should have had absolutely no way of knowing about, raising genuine questions about exactly what source material medieval mapmakers actually had access to. The Piri Reis map, coastlines that shouldn't have been known yet. In 1929, researchers cataloguing historical documents in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul discovered a partial map drawn on gazelle skin parchment in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis. The map, which covers the Atlantic Ocean coastlines of Europe, Africa, and South America, includes a detailed inscription in which Piri Reis explains that he compiled his map using a combination of contemporary Portuguese and Arab sources, along with, notably, a copy of a much older map that he specifically credits to Christopher Columbus himself, drawn during Columbus's own Atlantic voyages just 2 decades earlier. Piri Reis himself was a genuinely accomplished and well-documented historical figure in his own right, serving as a career naval officer within the Ottoman Empire and later compiling an extensive maritime navigational guide called the Kitab-ul-Bahriyeh, detailing sailing routes, harbours, and coastal features throughout the Mediterranean, a body of work that firmly establishes him as a serious, professionally trained cartographer working from the best available contemporary sources of his era, rather than an isolated amateur mapmaker working from questionable or fabricated materials. The map's genuine accuracy regarding the eastern coastline of South America, achieved at a period when European exploration and mapping of this specific region remained in its very earliest stages, has long impressed cartographic historians studying the document. What has generated considerably more sustained public fascination and scholarly debate, however, is a specific southern portion of the map that some researchers have interpreted as depicting the northern coastline of Antarctica, a continent that wouldn't be officially discovered and confirmed by European explorers until 1820, roughly 3 centuries after Piri Reis completed his map. Proponents of this Antarctic interpretation, including a retired US Air Force officer named Harold Ostrander, whose analysis gained wider attention starting in the 1960s, have argued that specific coastal features depicted on this southern portion of the map correspond closely to the actual under-ice topography of Antarctica's coastline, information that wouldn't be available to any cartographer until sophisticated modern seismic and radar mapping technology became available in the 20th century, and have suggested this apparent correspondence indicates Piri Reis had access to source material depicting Antarctica during a period before the continent's ice sheet had fully formed, potentially implying an ancient, sophisticated mapping tradition considerably older and more geographically comprehensive than anything else known to have existed anywhere in the historical record. This particular theory gained considerably wider public attention following its inclusion in several popular alternative history books published throughout the 1960s and 1970s, works that presented the Antarctic interpretation as compelling evidence for a lost, technologically sophisticated, ancient civilization capable of mapping the entire globe with a precision that wouldn't be matched again until the modern era. A dramatic claim that, while genuinely captivating to popular audiences, has never gained meaningful acceptance among professional cartographic historians or specialists in the history of exploration and map-making. Mainstream historians of cartography and geologists studying Antarctic ice sheet formation have offered considerably more measured and, according to the overwhelming weight of scholarly opinion, better supported explanations for this specific portion of the map. Several cartographic historians have argued the southern coastline in question more likely represents a somewhat distorted or speculative continuation of the South American coastline itself, curving eastward in a manner consistent with common cartographic conventions and geographic misunderstandings of this specific historical period, rather than a genuine, accurate depiction of Antarctica at all. Geologists studying Antarctica's ice sheet history have also pointed out that the continent's ice cover has remained substantially, continuously present for millions of years, making the idea of an accurate, ice-free coastal map created within the time frame required by the ancient advanced civilization theory geologically implausible on its own separate scientific terms. Cartographic historians specializing in this specific period also point out that 16th century mapmakers routinely filled in unknown or unexplored portions of their maps using speculative, imaginative extensions of known coastlines, a common and well-documented practice reflecting genuine uncertainty about geography that hadn't yet been thoroughly explored and charted by contemporary sailors, rather than evidence of access to some lost, considerably more accurate source map depicting territory that wouldn't be genuinely explored for centuries. This kind of speculative coastal extension appears on numerous other surviving maps from this same general period, suggesting the pattern found on the Piri Reis map may simply reflect a standard cartographic convention of its era, rather than requiring any more exotic explanation. Regardless of which specific interpretation of the map's southern portion ultimately proves correct, the Piri Reis map remains a genuinely significant historical document in its own right, precisely because Piri Reis's own written inscription openly acknowledges his reliance on a considerably older source map attributed to Columbus, a document that has never survived independently and whose own ultimate origins and sources remain entirely unknown, since Columbus's original charts from his Atlantic voyages have themselves been lost to history. This creates a genuine, if more modest, mystery in its own right. An accurate, detailed 16th century map explicitly built upon earlier source material that no longer exists for modern researchers to independently examine and verify. The Piri Reis map, then, represents a mystery layered upon a mystery, a documented historical artifact whose most famous and controversial feature remains genuinely disputed among specialists, sitting atop an entirely separate and equally unresolved question regarding the lost source materials the map's own creator explicitly credited, but which have never been recovered. And from a map hinting at lost geographic knowledge, we turn to an actual physical structure in the Peruvian highlands, where stone blocks were cut and fitted together with such extraordinary precision that a single sheet of paper still cannot be inserted between them today. Sacsayhuaman, stonework precision that still impresses modern engineers. High above the city of Cusco in the Peruvian highlands sits the massive stone complex of Sacsayhuaman, built by the Inca sometime during the 15th century as a combination fortress and ceremonial religious complex. The site's most famous feature is its enormous zigzagging defensive wall, constructed from massive polygonal limestone blocks, some weighing well over 100 tons, cut and fitted together with a level of precision that remains genuinely difficult to fully explain using only the stone and bronze tools known to have been available to Inca engineers of this period. Spanish colonial chroniclers who witnessed Sacsayhuaman relatively soon after the Spanish conquest of the Inca Empire in the 1530s left behind some of the only surviving eyewitness descriptions of the site while it still remained largely intact, since the Spanish subsequently dismantled and repurposed a considerable portion of the complex's smaller, more easily transportable stones for their own construction projects in nearby Cusco, meaning the massive polygonal blocks that survive at the site today likely represent only the largest and most difficult to move portion of what was originally a considerably more extensive fortress and ceremonial complex. What makes Sacsayhuaman's stonework so persistently remarkable is the specific style of construction the Inca employed here, using irregular, multi-sided polygonal blocks fitted together without any mortar at all, each stone individually shaped to interlock perfectly with its neighbours on every side, creating joints so precise that, even today, after more than 5 centuries of exposure to Peru's seismically active environment, a single sheet of paper genuinely cannot be inserted into most of the gaps between adjacent stones. Individual blocks within the wall frequently feature an astonishing number of distinct angled faces, some blocks documented with as many as 12 separate flat surfaces, each one precisely shaped to fit tightly against a specific corresponding surface on an adjacent stone, meaning Inca stoneworkers effectively had to solve an enormously complex 3-dimensional puzzle for every single block placed within the wall, adjusting and readjusting each stone's shape through careful, iterative testing until a satisfactory fit against all of its neighbours was finally achieved. A process that modern engineers studying the technique describe as genuinely remarkable in its combination of patience, spatial reasoning, and sheer technical skill. This specific construction technique, sometimes called polygonal masonry, appears to have served a genuinely practical engineering purpose beyond simple visual impressiveness, since the irregular, interlocking shape of each stone helps distribute seismic energy during earthquakes considerably more effectively than a simpler, uniform rectangular block pattern would allow, likely explaining why so much genuine Inca stonework, including Sacsayhuaman and the famous site of Machu Picchu, has survived numerous significant earthquakes over the centuries, with remarkably little structural damage, even as many considerably more modern buildings constructed in the same earthquake-prone region using less sophisticated methods have suffered severe damage or complete collapse during comparable seismic events. The genuine engineering mystery here centers on exactly how Inca stoneworkers achieved this level of precision fitting using only the relatively simple tools confirmed to have been available to them, primarily harder stone hammers used to gradually shape and smooth the significantly softer limestone blocks through careful, repeated percussion, along with bronze tools used for finer detail work. Modern experimental archaeology has demonstrated that this basic technique absolutely could produce the precisely fitted joints seen at Sacsayhuaman, though replicating the process convincingly requires an enormous investment of skilled labour and time, with some experimental reconstructions suggesting a single large block might require months of dedicated shaping work by a skilled team of stoneworkers before achieving a properly precise fit with its neighbouring stones. What continues to genuinely puzzle researchers isn't simply the stone shaping technique itself, but the sheer logistics involved in transporting some of these massive blocks, several weighing well over 100 tons, from their original quarry sites to Sacsayhuaman's specific hilltop location, a transportation challenge involving considerable elevation change and difficult mountainous terrain, using a civilization that, like every other pre-Columbian American culture we've discussed tonight, had no wheeled vehicles and no large draft animals comparable to horses or oxen capable of hauling loads of this mass. Inca oral tradition and limited Spanish colonial era written accounts describe the use of massive log rollers, extensive ramp systems, and enormous coordinated labour forces, sometimes numbering in the thousands of workers according to some colonial accounts, working together to move individual stones into position, a labour mobilisation effort that would have required a genuinely sophisticated level of centralised political organisation and logistical planning to successfully coordinate, reinforcing broader archaeological evidence suggesting the Inca Empire possessed considerably more advanced administrative and engineering capability than popular historical memory often credits them with today. This labor organization system, known within the Inca Empire as mita, functioned as a form of mandatory rotational public labor service, in which communities throughout the empire were obligated to contribute a certain amount of collective work toward major state construction and agricultural projects each year, a system that provided the Inca state with exactly the kind of large, reliable, and well-organized workforce necessary to undertake genuinely massive construction projects like Sacsayhuaman, without requiring anything resembling a permanent, professional construction workforce maintained year-round purely for this specific purpose. Sacsayhuaman's precisely fitted stones continue to impress engineers and stoneworkers studying the site even now, more than 5 centuries after its original construction, standing as a genuine testament to Inca engineering sophistication, even as the exact combination of tools, techniques, and organizational methods used to achieve this level of precision using pre-industrial technology remains a subject of ongoing archaeological research and, in certain specific technical details, genuine continued debate. And speaking of underwater mysteries connected to lost civilizations, a formation of large, flat stone blocks discovered beneath shallow waters near the Bahamas has generated decades of genuine scientific disagreement regarding whether it represents a natural geological formation or genuine human construction. The Bimini Road, natural formation or something built by hand. In 1968, divers exploring shallow waters just off the coast of North Bimini in the Bahamas discovered an unusual underwater formation, a roughly half-mile-long line of large, flat, rectangular limestone blocks, arranged in a pattern that some observers immediately felt resembled a deliberately constructed road or wall. The discovery quickly attracted widespread public attention, particularly because it emerged during a period of considerable popular interest in the legend of Atlantis, and some early proponents specifically connected the formation to psychic predictions made decades earlier by the American mystic Edgar Cayce, who had predicted that evidence of Atlantis would surface near Bimini sometime around 1968 or 1969, a prediction that seemed remarkably, if coincidentally, well-timed to some observers once the formation was actually discovered. Cayce, who died in 1945 and had built a substantial following during his lifetime through a series of trance-based readings covering topics ranging from personal health advice to broader historical and prophetic claims, had specifically predicted decades earlier that a portion of the lost continent of Atlantis would resurface near Bimini during roughly this exact time frame, a prediction that his existing followers seized upon enthusiastically once the underwater formation was actually discovered, even though the geological explanation ultimately favoured by the overwhelming majority of professional researchers who directly examined the site makes no reference to Atlantis, sunken continents, or any civilization beyond the well-documented natural history of the Bahamian coastline itself. Geologists who have studied the Bimini Road extensively generally conclude that the formation represents a naturally occurring geological feature, specifically a type of beach rock formation created through the natural cementation of loose sediment along an ancient shoreline, subsequently exposed and fractured into distinctive rectangular blocks through natural processes, including erosion, wave action, and thermal expansion and contraction cracking that commonly occurs in this specific type of limestone formation. This natural beach rock formation process is well documented at numerous other locations around the world and produces formations that can appear genuinely artificial to a casual observer, despite forming through entirely natural geological processes without any human involvement whatsoever. Similar naturally occurring beach rock formations, displaying comparably regular, rectangular block patterns formed through entirely natural geological processes, have been documented and studied extensively at various coastal locations throughout the Caribbean and Mediterranean regions, providing geologists with a substantial body of comparative evidence supporting the natural formation explanation for Bimini specifically, since these other, less controversial examples demonstrate conclusively that this particular kind of naturally regular, artificial-looking stone pattern can and does occur without any human construction involved whatsoever, forming purely through the combination of consistent sediment deposition, natural mineral cementation, and predictable fracture patterns common to this specific type of coastal limestone. Proponents who continue to argue for an artificial human-made origin for the Bimini Road point to what they consider suspiciously regular block sizes and shapes, along with the formation's specific linear arrangement, as evidence inconsistent with purely natural formation processes, and some researchers have proposed the blocks may represent an ancient causeway, dock, or foundation structure built by a pre-Columbian culture, potentially submerged due to rising sea levels following the last ice age. The overwhelming majority of professional geologists who have directly examined the site, including detailed core samples drilled through several of the individual blocks, report finding internal structural characteristics entirely consistent with natural beach rock formation, including natural fracture patterns and mineral composition that would be genuinely difficult to explain if the blocks had actually been deliberately quarried and shaped by human stoneworkers. This geological evidence has led the substantial majority of professional archaeologists and geologists studying the site to conclude the Bimini Road most likely represents a natural formation, though a smaller number of researchers, including some with legitimate academic credentials in adjacent fields, continue to argue the case remains genuinely open, pointing to what they consider unresolved questions regarding the formation's unusually regular geometric arrangement. This particular entry on tonight's list illustrates something genuinely important about how scientific mysteries actually get resolved or fail to be fully resolved over time. Even when the substantial majority of specialist opinion converges toward a single explanation based on genuine physical evidence like core samples and mineral analysis, a smaller group of researchers can continue to maintain a minority position, keeping a question technically unresolved in the strictest sense, even when the weight of scientific evidence points fairly clearly in one particular direction. This dynamic isn't unique to the Bimini Road, and understanding it offers a genuinely useful lens for evaluating similar scientific controversies more broadly. A minority scientific position doesn't automatically indicate the majority view is wrong, nor does majority consensus automatically guarantee absolute certainty, particularly for questions involving ancient, poorly documented events where direct, unambiguous evidence remains genuinely limited. What matters most is the specific quality and weight of evidence supporting each competing position, and for the Bimini Road specifically, the core sample and mineralogical evidence supporting natural formation remains considerably more extensive and more rigorously peer-reviewed than the evidence offered in support of an artificial, human-made origin. Whether the Bimini Road ultimately represents ancient human engineering or simply a compelling accident of natural geological processes, it remains a genuinely interesting case study in exactly how difficult it can be to fully and permanently settle even seemingly straightforward archaeological questions once popular imagination and legitimate scientific inquiry become intertwined. And from stones beneath the ocean near the Bahamas, we travel now to the Pacific, to an entire ancient city built directly on top of a coral reef, using construction techniques and transported materials that continue to genuinely puzzle the engineers who study it today. Nan Madol, the city built on a coral reef. Off the eastern coast of the island of Pohnpei, in the Federated States of Micronesia, sits one of the most genuinely remarkable and least widely known archaeological sites anywhere in the Pacific, Nan Madol, an entire city constructed across nearly 100 small artificial islets, built directly on top of a coral reef flat, connected by a network of canals that once led some of the earliest European visitors to nickname the site the Venice of the Pacific. Constructed primarily between roughly 1200 and 1500 CE by the Saudeleur dynasty, which ruled Pohnpei during this period, Nan Madol's massive walls and structures were built using enormous columnar basalt logs, naturally hexagonal rock formations similar to those seen at Northern Ireland's Giant's Causeway, some individual columns weighing up to 50 tons, stacked in a distinctive log cabin-style arrangement to form massive retaining walls reaching heights of over 25 feet in some locations. The Saudeleur dynasty itself is remembered in Pohnpeian oral tradition as an unusually centralized and, according to some accounts, genuinely oppressive ruling authority, one of the only clearly documented examples of a centralized dynastic political system emerging anywhere across the wider Micronesian island world. A political consolidation that may help explain how the enormous, sustained labor mobilization required to complete Nan Madol's construction was actually achieved and coordinated across what would otherwise have been a fairly small and dispersed island population. The genuine engineering mystery at the heart of Nan Madol centers on the sheer logistics required to source and transport this staggering quantity of massive basalt columns, since the nearest known source of this specific type of columnar basalt lies on the opposite side of Pohnpei Island itself, requiring these enormous stone columns to be transported a considerable distance, likely by raft, across open or coastal water, before being precisely maneuvered into position atop a shallow coral reef, all accomplished using a Pacific Island society that, like the vast majority of pre-industrial Pacific cultures, had no metal tools, no wheeled vehicles, and no draft animals of any kind capable of assisting with this kind of massive stone transportation. Researchers estimate the total volume of basalt transported to construct Nan Madol's walls and structures at somewhere around 750,000 metric tons, an almost incomprehensible quantity of stone to move using purely manual labor and simple watercraft, particularly when factoring in the additional challenge of precisely positioning individual columns weighing up to 50 tons each into stable, interlocking wall configurations without the assistance of any mechanical lifting equipment whatsoever, a scale of achievement that places Nan Madol firmly among the most impressive purely manual engineering feats documented anywhere in the ancient Pacific world. Local Pohnpeian oral tradition offers its own explanation for this remarkable engineering feat, describing the basalt columns as having been moved through the combined magical power of two legendary founding brothers, sometimes named Olisipa and Olosopa, who according to tradition employed sorcery to make the massive stones fly through the air to their intended positions. A folkloric explanation that, much like the walking Moai oral tradition we encountered earlier regarding Rapa Nui, likely encodes a genuine folk memory of an extraordinarily impressive engineering achievement, reframed through generations of oral storytelling into a more supernatural explanatory framework. Archaeologists studying the site today generally believe the actual transportation method likely involved a combination of wooden rafts, ropes, and levers, moving the stones during high tide to take maximum advantage of water buoyancy in reducing the effective weight that needed to be manually maneuvered into position, though no detailed, universally accepted reconstruction of the complete process has been definitively established, and the sheer organizational and logistical sophistication required to complete a project of this scale using a population that, based on the island's limited size and known historical population estimates, likely numbered only in the thousands, continues to genuinely impress researchers studying the site. Nan Madol's relative obscurity within popular historical and archaeological awareness, despite its genuine engineering sophistication and its designation as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2016, reflects a pattern we've already touched on tonight regarding sites like Cahokia and the Kingdom of Aksum, remarkable ancient achievements that, for various historical and cultural reasons related to which regions of the world received the most sustained scholarly and popular attention over the past 2 centuries, remain considerably less widely known than comparable sites in more extensively studied regions like Egypt, Greece, or Mesoamerica. Modern Pohnpeians maintain a genuine living connection to Nan Madol through ongoing oral tradition, including specific stories about which noble families held ceremonial responsibilities at particular sections of the ancient city, a body of local knowledge that continues to inform how contemporary archaeologists approach and interpret the site, offering a valuable complement to purely physical archaeological evidence in a manner reminiscent of the collaborative relationship we discussed earlier between modern Pueblo communities and archaeological research at Chaco Canyon. Today, Nan Madol faces genuine ongoing conservation challenges, including rising sea levels and encroaching mangrove root systems that continue to gradually destabilize its ancient basalt walls, adding a genuine sense of urgency to ongoing efforts to fully document and understand this remarkable site before further natural deterioration potentially limits future opportunities for detailed archaeological study. And from an entire city built above a coral reef, we descend now into the Earth itself, into an enormous underground city carved beneath the plains of central Turkey, one capable of sheltering thousands of people at once, whose full original purpose and complete extent remain genuinely unresolved even after decades of dedicated excavation. Derinkuyu, the underground city nobody expected to find. In 1963, a resident of the Cappadocia region of central Turkey, renovating his home, knocked down a wall in his basement and discovered a hidden passage leading into a vast network of underground rooms and tunnels, a discovery that would eventually reveal Derinkuyu, one of the largest and most sophisticated underground cities ever documented anywhere in the ancient world. The homeowner's initial discovery reportedly involved nothing more than a routine attempt to create additional storage space, and it wasn't until subsequent, more extensive excavation by Turkish archaeological authorities over the following years that the true staggering scale of the hidden complex became apparent, gradually revealing level after level of interconnected rooms, passages, and chambers, extending far beyond what anyone initially suspected might exist beneath this single unremarkable residential basement wall. Carved directly into the region's distinctive soft volcanic rock, Derinkuyu extends to a depth of approximately 280 feet underground, spanning at least 18 separate levels, though ongoing excavation continues to suggest the full complex may extend even deeper and wider than currently mapped. At its peak capacity, researchers estimate Derinkuyu could have sheltered somewhere between 20 and 50,000 people, along with their livestock and stored food supplies, for extended periods of time, a genuinely staggering capacity for an entirely underground settlement. The complex includes remarkably sophisticated infrastructure for a facility of this age, including ventilation shafts, some reaching all the way to the surface, engineered specifically to maintain consistent, breathable airflow throughout even the deepest levels of the underground city, along with wells providing access to fresh water, extensive networks of stables for livestock, wine and oil presses, storage rooms, chapels, and most strikingly, massive circular stone doors, some weighing up to half a ton, that could be rolled into place from the inside to seal off specific tunnel sections during times of genuine external threat. Doors specifically designed so they couldn't be opened again from the outside once sealed. The ventilation system in particular represents a genuinely sophisticated piece of ancient engineering in its own right, with researchers identifying over 50 separate vertical shafts distributed throughout the complex, each carefully positioned to maintain adequate airflow and prevent the buildup of stale air or smoke from cooking fires across all 18 underground levels. Simultaneously, a level of engineered environmental control that modern engineers studying the site consider genuinely impressive even by contemporary standards, let alone for a facility whose earliest sections may have been excavated using nothing more sophisticated than simple iron tools. The exact original date of Derinkuyi's initial construction remains a genuinely unresolved archaeological question, with some researchers proposing the earliest tunnels may date back as far as the Phrygian period, roughly the 8th or 7th century BCE, based on comparative analysis of tool marks and construction techniques, while the site was clearly expanded and actively used across numerous subsequent historical periods, including extensively during the Byzantine era, when local Christian populations are well documented to have used the underground complex as protection against various periods of raiding and persecution. Byzantine-era modifications to the complex are particularly well documented through the presence of carved chapels, complete with distinct cruciform floor plans and simple carved crosses, along with baptismal fonts carved directly into the rock in several locations, providing genuine, datable archaeological evidence for this specific later phase of the underground city's continued use, even as the considerably earlier origins of the site's initial deepest excavation phases remain comparatively more speculative and less precisely dated using currently available archaeological evidence. What continues to genuinely puzzle researchers isn't simply Derinkuyu's impressive scale, but the coordinated, long-term, multi-generational planning clearly required to design and progressively expand a facility of this complexity over what appears to have been many centuries of continuous, deliberate excavation and infrastructure development. The precise engineering knowledge required to maintain proper ventilation across 18 distinct underground levels, prevent structural collapse across such an enormous excavated volume, and manage water access and waste removal for a population potentially numbering in the tens of thousands, represents a genuinely sophisticated body of practical engineering knowledge that appears to have been developed, refined, and passed down across many generations, without any single comprehensive ancient text surviving to fully document the planning and construction process in the community's own words. Derinkuyu is connected via an underground tunnel discovered during later excavation to another nearby underground city called Kaymaklı, suggesting the wider Cappadocia region may contain an entire network of interconnected underground settlements, the full extent of which remains genuinely unmapped and unexplored even today, since ongoing excavation continues to reveal new passages and chambers on a fairly regular basis, meaning our current understanding of the site's true total scale likely remains incomplete. Derinkuyu stands today as a genuine testament to just how much sophisticated ancient engineering can remain completely hidden and unknown, sitting directly beneath an active, inhabited modern town, until a single homeowner's basement renovation project happens to break through into a forgotten chamber that had waited, sealed and silent for potentially thousands of years. And from an underground city built to shelter the living, we turn now to a piece of ancient cloth that has generated one of the most persistent and most scientifically contested religious controversies in the entire modern world. The Shroud of Turin. Science and faith still genuinely disagree. The Shroud of Turin, a length of linen cloth roughly 14 feet long, bears the faint ghostly image of a man's body, front and back, showing wounds consistent with crucifixion, and has been venerated for centuries by many within the Catholic tradition as the actual burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth, kept today in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy, and put on public display only rarely, given its extraordinary religious significance to millions of believers around the world. The image depicts wounds consistent with the specific details of crucifixion as described in the Christian Gospels, including apparent puncture marks around the wrists and feet, evidence of severe flogging across the back and shoulders, and a wound to the side, details that many believers consider genuinely significant corroborating evidence. Since some of these specific details, including the precise placement of nail wounds through the wrists rather than the palms, weren't well understood or commonly depicted in medieval religious artwork, raising the interesting historical question of why a supposed medieval forger would have included such specific and, for the time period, somewhat unusual anatomical details if simply attempting to create a convincing devotional forgery based on contemporary artistic convention alone. The image itself remains genuinely puzzling from a purely technical standpoint, since detailed scientific examination has established that the discoloration forming the visible image exists only on the very surface fibers of the cloth, without any evidence of paint, dye, or pigment penetrating deeper into the fabric, a characteristic that has proven genuinely difficult for researchers to fully replicate using any conventional ancient or medieval artistic technique, including painting, scorching, or various proposed early photographic or chemical processes. The most significant and most widely publicized scientific test conducted on the shroud took place in 1988, when 3 separate independent laboratories, working with samples taken from the cloth under the joint supervision of the Vatican and the British Museum, conducted radiocarbon dating analysis and concluded, with what researchers described as a reasonably high degree of statistical confidence, that the linen fibers dated to somewhere between 1260 and 1390 CE, a period consistent with the shroud's first definitively documented historical appearance in France during the 1350s rather than the 1st century CE, when Jesus' crucifixion is traditionally understood to have occurred. The 3 laboratories involved in this landmark 1988 testing, located at the University of Arizona, the University of Oxford, and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, each conducted their radiocarbon analysis independently, without direct knowledge of each other's specific results, until after all 3 had submitted their findings. A methodological safeguard specifically designed to prevent any single laboratory's result from influencing the others, and all 3 labs reported dates falling within a genuinely consistent range, a level of independent agreement that many scientists studying the controversy consider a significant point in favour of the medieval dating's overall reliability, regardless of the ongoing contamination-related objections raised by critics of the test. This 1988 radiocarbon result, while treated by many mainstream historians and scientists as effectively settling the shroud's medieval origin, has continued to face genuine, persistent challenges from a smaller but academically credentialed group of researchers, who argue the specific samples tested may have been taken from a section of the cloth contaminated or repaired using newer medieval-era thread, following a well-documented fire that damaged the shroud in 1532, potentially skewing the radiocarbon results toward a more recent date than the cloth's original fabric would actually indicate. Proponents of this contamination theory point to documented historical evidence of repair work performed on the shroud following the 1532 fire, along with subsequent chemical and microscopic analysis. Some researchers argue reveals traces of a distinct later period cotton weave, specifically in the area from which the 1988 samples were taken. Additional independent research conducted on the shroud over subsequent decades has produced a genuinely mixed and continuously contested body of evidence, including some studies proposing that pollen and limestone particle traces recovered from the cloth are more consistent with an origin in 1st century Jerusalem than with medieval Europe, findings that have themselves been challenged by other researchers questioning the methodology and chain of custody involved in collecting and analysing these specific particle samples. This ongoing, genuinely unresolved scientific disagreement between the widely cited 1988 radiocarbon results and the persistent methodological challenges raised against that specific test by a smaller group of credentialed researchers, means the Shroud of Turin remains, even today, a genuine point of active scientific dispute rather than a fully and universally settled historical question, regardless of one's own personal religious beliefs regarding the object's ultimate authenticity or significance. The Vatican itself has notably never officially declared the shroud authentic, treating it instead as a valuable object of devotion and contemplation, whose specific historical origin remains a matter for ongoing scientific inquiry rather than settled religious doctrine. This carefully measured official position, neither definitively endorsing nor definitively rejecting the shroud's authenticity, reflects a broader, genuinely thoughtful approach the Catholic Church has taken toward numerous contested relics and religious artifacts throughout its history, generally allowing continued scientific investigation and scholarly debate to proceed on its own terms, rather than attempting to settle empirical questions of historical dating through religious authority or doctrine, a position that has allowed the Shroud of Turin to remain a genuine, actively studied scientific mystery rather than becoming a fully closed question dictated by religious pronouncement alone. Whatever its ultimate origin, the Shroud of Turin remains one of the most intensively studied objects in the entire history of forensic and archaeological science, and the genuine, persistent disagreement among credentialed researchers regarding even its basic dating illustrates just how difficult it can be to achieve full, final scientific consensus, even when applying some of the most sophisticated laboratory testing methods available anywhere in the modern world. And from a religious relic still generating genuine scientific division today, we travel to the most remote inhabited island on the planet, where a wooden script found nowhere else on Earth remains almost entirely undeciphered, its meaning locked away by the same tragic disruption of cultural memory that we discussed earlier regarding this island's population. Rongorongo, Easter Island's silent written language. On Rapa Nui, the remote Pacific island better known to much of the world as Easter Island, a small number of surviving wooden tablets bear a unique system of carved glyphs known as Rongorongo, a script that represents one of extremely few known instances anywhere in the world of a writing system that appears to have developed entirely independently, without any outside contact or influence from any other literate culture, making it a genuinely rare example of writing being independently invented from scratch by an isolated human society. The glyphs themselves are carved using a distinctive technique known as reverse boustrophedon, in which alternating lines of text run in opposite directions, with the tablet requiring a physical rotation of 180 degrees between each successive line in order to read the text in its proper intended sequence, an unusual and genuinely distinctive writing convention that appears in extremely few other documented writing systems anywhere else in the world, adding yet another layer of genuine linguistic novelty to an already singular and isolated script. Fewer than 30 authenticated Rongorongo tablets and fragments survive today, scattered across various museum collections around the world, most of them collected during the mid to late 1800s, after European contact with the island had already begun causing severe, well-documented disruption to the island's traditional population and cultural institutions. Disruption we touched on earlier when discussing the devastating 19th century slave raids that removed a significant portion of the island's population, including individuals who held crucial, specialized knowledge. The surviving tablets themselves are carved from a variety of different wood types, including some pieces of driftwood and, in at least one documented and genuinely poignant case, a European ship's oar that had washed ashore or been otherwise acquired by islanders and subsequently repurposed for carving additional Rongorongo text, a detail that reflects both the islanders' resourcefulness in working with whatever suitable material happened to be available on a resource-limited island, and the genuine cultural significance they continued to place on preserving and creating written text, even as outside contact and its accompanying disruptions were already reshaping nearly every other aspect of traditional island life. This timing represents the central, genuinely tragic obstacle preventing Rongorongo's decipherment today. By the time European missionaries and researchers began seriously documenting and collecting the tablets during the 1860s and 1870s, the specific class of trained specialists on the island who had actually been capable of reading the script fluently had already been decimated by disease, the aforementioned slave raids, and broader colonial disruption, meaning no fully literate reader of Rongorongo survived long enough to provide outside researchers with a reliable, verified translation before this specialized knowledge was lost entirely. Various islanders interviewed by 19th and early 20th century researchers claimed partial ability to read certain tablets, but their proposed readings varied significantly and inconsistently from person to person, suggesting these later informants may have been reciting memorized chants or partial oral traditions associated with specific tablets, rather than genuinely, fluently reading the actual script character by character in the way a literate reader would approach an unfamiliar written passage. Modern computational and statistical analysis of the surviving Rongorongo corpus has confirmed the script displays genuine linguistic structure consistent with an actual functioning writing system, rather than purely decorative or random symbolism, including consistent patterns of glyph frequency and repetition that closely parallel patterns found in verified natural languages, mirroring, in this specific respect, the same tantalizing statistical evidence we discussed earlier regarding the Voynich manuscript. Some researchers have proposed the script may partially encode genealogical records, ritual chants, or calendrical information based on limited comparative analysis with related oral traditions still remembered on the island, but no comprehensive, independently verifiable decipherment has ever achieved broad scholarly acceptance. One particularly notable line of research has focused specifically on a tablet known as the Santiago Staff, whose text shows repeating sequences some researchers interpret as a genealogical king list, comparable in basic structure to similar dynastic lists found in other ancient literate cultures around the world, though this specific interpretation, like every other proposed reading of Rongorongo, remains a plausible hypothesis rather than a definitively confirmed and independently verified translation accepted across the wider community of specialists studying Pacific linguistics and Rapa Nui's cultural history. The specific historical tragedy underlying Rongorongo's continued mystery, the deliberate colonial-era destruction of the very specialist community capable of reading it, distinguishes this particular mystery from purely intellectual puzzles like the Voynich manuscript or the Phaistos disc, since Rongorongo's undeciphered status results directly from a documented, devastating disruption to a living, functioning, literate tradition, rather than simply reflecting the natural passage of time separating us from a civilization that, in the ordinary course of history, gradually stopped using its own writing system for its own internal reasons. Rongorongo remains today a genuine active area of ongoing linguistic research, with new computational and statistical techniques periodically applied to the surviving tablets in hopes of finally extracting reliable patterns that might eventually support a verified decipherment. Until that day arrives, if it ever does, the specific meaning encoded within these remarkable wooden tablets remains locked away, a genuine written language whose last fluent readers were lost within living historical memory, rather than across the deep, more forgiving gulf of many thousands of years that separates us from several of the other mysteries covered earlier tonight. 20 mysteries, 20 genuine gaps in human knowledge, spanning nearly every inhabited continent, and a time frame stretching across more than 11,000 years of documented human history, from Göbekli Tepe's hunter-gatherer monument, builders through a religious relic still generating genuine laboratory disagreement today. What 20 unsolved mysteries actually tell us. Looking back across everything covered tonight, a genuinely important distinction emerges among these 20 mysteries, one worth sitting with for a moment before we close things out. Some, like the Antikythera mechanism and Göbekli Tepe, are mysteries of context, genuine physical objects whose basic existence and function science understands reasonably well, but whose surrounding historical circumstances, who exactly built them, and why nothing comparable survives from the same period, remain genuinely unexplained. Others, like the Voynich manuscript, the Phaistos disc, and Rongorongo, are mysteries of language, genuine written communication whose specific content remains locked away behind a linguistic barrier that modern cryptography and computational linguistics, for all their genuine sophistication, have not yet managed to fully break through. Still others, like Baalbek, Stonehenge, and Sacsayhuaman, are mysteries of engineering, genuine physical achievements whose basic method of construction researchers can reasonably reconstruct in broad outline, even as the precise logistics and often the underlying motivation remain genuinely open questions. Grouping tonight's 20 mysteries this way isn't simply a tidy organizational exercise. It highlights something genuinely important about the actual limits of historical and archaeological knowledge more broadly. Physical evidence alone, no matter how thoroughly and carefully studied using ever more sophisticated laboratory techniques, can only ever answer certain specific kinds of questions. A well-preserved bronze mechanism can tell us a great deal about ancient mechanical engineering capability, but very little about the specific individual who actually designed it. A precisely fitted stone wall can tell us a great deal about ancient masonry technique, but comparatively little about the underlying religious or political motivation that drove its builders to invest such enormous effort into achieving that precision in the first place. And then there are mysteries like the Bimini Road and the Great Sphinx's disputed dating, genuine scientific disagreements where credentialed researchers, examining the same identical physical evidence, continue to reach different conclusions, reminding us that science itself is an ongoing, continuously revised process rather than a fixed, permanently settled body of final answers, particularly when it comes to interpreting physical evidence from a period of human history that left behind no written explanation of its own. This ongoing, occasionally genuinely contentious quality of legitimate scientific debate is worth appreciating in its own right, rather than viewing it as a weakness or failure of the scientific method itself. The willingness of researchers to continue questioning, retesting, and re-examining even long-accepted conclusions whenever new evidence or new analytical techniques become available represents exactly the kind of intellectual honesty and rigor that has allowed our collective understanding of the ancient world to continue improving, gradually, decade after decade, even when that improvement sometimes takes the form of genuine, unresolved disagreement rather than a single, tidy, universally accepted answer. What connects nearly every single mystery covered tonight, regardless of which specific category it falls into, is a simple, genuinely humbling truth. For the overwhelming majority of human history, people built, wrote, and created remarkable things without leaving behind the kind of clear, comprehensive written explanation that would let us, thousands of years later, simply ask them directly what they were thinking. We're left instead with the physical evidence alone, remarkable in its own right, but permanently silent regarding the specific human motivations, beliefs, and circumstances that actually produced it. This silence isn't a failure of modern science or archaeology. It's simply the genuine, unavoidable limit of what physical evidence alone, however carefully studied, using ever more sophisticated laboratory and computational techniques, can actually tell us about people who lived, worked and died long before any written record of their own specific thoughts and intentions happened to survive into the present day. Every single mystery covered tonight represents an invitation for future researchers, equipped with technology and techniques we can't yet fully anticipate, to eventually close at least some part of the gap that currently separates us from a genuine, complete understanding of these remarkable ancient achievements. It's worth remembering, too, just how recently several of tonight's mysteries were even discovered at all. Derinkuyu sat completely unknown beneath an active, inhabited town until a single 1963 basement renovation broke through into its forgotten passages. Göbekli Tepe remained buried and unexamined until the mid-1990s, and its true significance to the entire timeline of human civilization has only been fully appreciated within the past 2 decades. The Longyu Caves waited beneath village ponds until 1992. Given how recently some of the most significant entries on tonight's list came to light, purely through chance discovery or newly available technology, it's worth wondering just how many additional genuine mysteries remain entirely unknown and undiscovered right now, sitting quietly beneath our feet, waiting for their own moment of accidental or deliberate rediscovery. Until that day comes, these 20 mysteries remain exactly what they've always been. A permanent, genuinely fascinating reminder that despite everything modern science has managed to explain about our world and its distant past, some of the most remarkable objects and structures human beings have ever created continue to keep their original secrets fully and quietly to themselves. From a bronze mechanism pulled from a Greek shipwreck, to an underground city hidden beneath a Turkish family's basement, to a religious relic still dividing laboratories today, these 20 stories span nearly every continent, nearly every era of recorded human history, and nearly every conceivable category of unanswered question, technological, linguistic, engineering, and religious alike. What unites them in the end isn't a shared explanation, since no single explanation could possibly cover a list this varied. It's simply the shared, quiet persistence of genuine human curiosity, the same impulse that first drove Greek sponge divers to investigate a mysterious shipwreck that drove a Turkish homeowner to keep knocking through an unexpected basement wall, and that tonight has hopefully kept your own attention through 20 genuine reminders that the ancient world still has plenty left to teach us whenever we're finally ready and equipped to listen properly. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.